The revolving door still turned a quarter second too slow. I'd forgotten that. 2 years away, and my body remembered the exact pause before the glass let you through, the way you had to trust it wouldn't clip your heel. I stepped into the lobby of Brenhall Stoss, and the receptionist looked up with a polite, blank smile. She didn't know me. New hire. That was fine. I wasn't here to be recognized at the front desk. Behind her, etched into the cast bronze wall, were the names of every signature project the firm had ever shipped. 4 of the first 6 were mine. My name wasn't on any of them anymore. Upstairs, on the top floor, Théo Castellani was about to walk into a meeting believing he'd won. He had no idea who the buyers had sent. I adjusted the strap of my bag and walked to the elevator I used to take every single morning. My old key card was still in the inside pocket of my work bag. I never threw it out. For 2 years it sat in there next to a dead pen and a folded floor plan I couldn't bring myself to recycle, and every so often my fingers would find the worn plastic edge, and I'd remember that the magnetic strip had been deactivated the same afternoon they walked me out. I bring it up because that small dead rectangle is the cleanest way I know to explain what they did to me. One Tuesday, I had access to every floor of a building I had helped imagine, and by Wednesday, a piece of plastic in my pocket opened nothing at all. My name is Iona Marchetti. For 17 years, I was a principal architect at Brenhall Stoss and Lindqvist, and for most of those years, I was the reason the firm's name meant anything beyond a logo on a tote bag. I should explain what the firm was, because you have to understand what was taken before you can understand what came back. Brenhall Stoss started as a small, stubborn practice founded by 3 partners who believed buildings should make people feel something other than processed. 2 of the founders were gone before I made Principal E, retired, then memorialized in a conference room name. The third, Aldous Brenhall, was still chairman emeritus when I joined as a junior associate, a tall, slow-spoken man who reviewed every drawing personally and once kept me at a desk until 2 a.m. because a stairwell I'd designed asked nothing of the person climbing it. I loved him for that. He was the first person in my professional life who treated my work as if it mattered enough to be wrong about. Over 17 years, I built the practice's reputation in cultural and civic work, the kind of buildings that end up on postcards, the kind that win the awards that bring in the next 10 clients, the Riverside Concert Hall with the folded copper roof, the research library that the city still calls the Lantern, a transit hub in a coastal city that I fought for through 4 rounds of value engineering until it survived almost intact. People who have never heard my name have stood inside rooms I shaped and felt their shoulders drop. That is the only legacy I have ever cared about. By the time I was 41, I was the firm's most senior design principal, the rainmaker the board trotted out for the big pitches, and the person every young architect in the studio actually wanted to learn from. I was not, however, an equity partner with any real control. I had a title, a corner of the top floor, and a handshake understanding with Aldous that the firm would always be a place where the work came first. A handshake understanding. Write that down somewhere. It's the most expensive thing I ever agreed to. Aldous had a nephew. I'd met Théo Castellani exactly twice before he came to work for us. Once at a holiday dinner where he explained cryptocurrency to a retired structural engineer for 40 minutes, and once at Aldous's 70th birthday, where he arrived late in an unstructured blazer that cost more than my first car and spent the evening on his phone near the bar. He had an MBA from a school he mentioned the way other people mention a medical diagnosis, and he had spent 3 years in something he called value creation at a consultancy whose clients were all other consultancies. He had never drawn a building. He had never stood on a site at 6 a.m. in the rain while a contractor explained why your beautiful cantilever was going to cost the earth. He had, as far as I could tell, never once felt the particular terror of presenting a year of your life to a client who was checking their watch. When Aldis's health started to slip, Théo arrived at the firm with a title someone had clearly let him choose for himself: Head of Strategic Direction. I remember the all-hands meeting where they introduced him. We gathered in the big presentation room on the top floor, the one with the long glass wall that looked out over the rooftops toward the harbor. I'd presented some of the most important work of my career in that room. Théo stood at the front of it in sneakers and talked for 20 minutes about unlocking latent brand equity and moving from a craft model to a scalable platform. A craft model. He said it the way you'd describe a quaint and slightly embarrassing relative. I caught the eye of Ren Aldridge, my closest ally on the design side, a brilliant project architect I'd mentored from her first week. She gave me a look that said, "What is happening?" and I gave her one back that said, "Be careful." And that was the beginning of the part of my life I'm telling you about. The first 6 months were death by 1,000 reorganizations. Théo discovered org charts the way a teenager discovers a guitar. He created a studio operations layer that sat between the designers and the clients, staffed by people who had opinions about our work and no ability to do it. He renamed the design principles Creative Resources. He instituted a project scoring framework that rewarded speed and margin discipline and quietly penalized exactly the kind of slow, careful, fought-for work that had built the firm's name. I tried, at first, to play it straight. I sat in his meetings. I learned his vocabulary. I made the case patiently that the projects he considered low margin were the ones that won us the high margin ones, that the awards were not vanity, that the reputation was the asset. He nodded a great deal. He used the phrase, "I hear you," the way some people use a door. And then one Thursday in late autumn, he scheduled what he called a portfolio alignment review, and I understood that the nodding had never meant anything at all. We were in a glass-walled meeting room off the main studio floor, deliberately glass, I realized later, so that the whole studio could watch through the walls. Théo sat with 2 of his operations people and a printout of project margins. He told me the firm was rebalancing toward its growth verticals. He told me the cultural and civic work, my work, was being deprioritized as a strategic focus. He told me my role was being evolved. Then he said the sentence I have replayed more times than I will admit. "Look, Iona, we love the heritage. We really do. But going forward, we need fresh blood, not nostalgia. The market doesn't pay for legacy." Nostalgia. 17 years, and the lantern, and the copper roof, and a generation of architects I'd trained. Nostalgia. I didn't say anything clever. I want to be honest with you about that, because the stories people tell about moments like this always end with a perfect line, and I didn't have one. I just felt the room go very quiet and very clear, the way it does right before you understand something that changes everything. Through the glass wall, I could see Ren at her desk, pretending not to watch, her hand frozen over her keyboard. I looked back at Théo, at his patient, rehearsed, certain face, and I thought, with a calm that surprised me, "You have no idea what you've just done, and you have no idea who you'll have to answer to for it." I just didn't know yet, in that exact moment, that I would be the one he'd answer to. They didn't fire me. That would have been clean. That would have given me a settlement and a story. Instead, Théo evolved my role over the following 4 weeks, with the patience of a man pulling the legs off something to see how long it keeps walking. He didn't have the authority to remove a named principal outright. Aldous, even diminished, was still chairman emeritus, and there were optics to manage. So Théo did the modern thing. He made the role disappear around me until staying felt like the indignity and leaving felt like the dignity. First, the projects. The Riverside Cultural Center I'd been shepherding through its third design phase was reassigned to better align with delivery capacity. I found out when a junior I'd never met emailed me asking where the structural coordination files were for the project he was now leading. I read that email 4 times. The cantilever I'd fought a contractor over for 2 months. The acoustic ceiling that had cost me a weekend of sleep. Handed to someone who spelled the engineer's name wrong in the subject line. Then, the room. My corner of the top floor, glass on 2 sides, north light. The desk where I'd drawn the lantern was needed for the new strategy pod. I was offered a hot desk on the 4th floor in the operations layer, near a printer that jammed. Then, the meetings. I simply stopped being invited. The Monday Principals Review, which I had run for 9 years, started happening without me. I learned the new pitch schedule from a calendar I no longer had permission to edit, only to view. Wren came to my jammed printer desk on the 4th floor on a Friday evening, after most people had gone, and sat on the edge of it the way she used to sit on the edge of my old one. "This is insane," she said quietly. "People are talking. Everyone knows what he's doing." "Knowing isn't the same as stopping it," I said. Marisol asked him directly in the principal's review. She asked why the civic work was being killed when it's half our public reputation. Marisol Vasquez was the firm's managing director, the one person above Théo in the day-to-day, the one I'd hoped might hold a line. And Wren's jaw tightened. He said, in front of everyone, "Iona's a wonderful designer, but she's emotionally attached to a version of this firm that doesn't pay the rent. We can't run a business on someone's feelings." There it was again. The same move. Take the precise thing that makes you good at your work, the caring, and rename it a weakness. I want to tell you I was furious. The truth is closer to the opposite. Something in me had gone very still and very organized. While Théo had been rebranding my care as sentiment, I had started quietly in the evenings, doing something I hadn't done in 17 years. I had started taking meetings outside the building. The transit hub I'd designed in the coastal city, the one I'd defended through 4 rounds of value engineering, had a client who had become, over the years, something more than a client. Her name was Saoirse Holloway, and she had moved on from running that city's development authority to a very different chair, managing partner at Caldwell Reyes Partners, a private investment firm that quietly bought and rebuilt mid-sized professional practices, design firms, engineering consultancies, the unglamorous, durable businesses that the loud capital ignored. Saoirse had called me 3 weeks into my evolution, ostensibly to catch up. By the end of the call, it was not a catch-up. "They're hollowing it out, aren't they?" she said. It wasn't a question. I've watched it from the outside. The civic work is the brand. Kill the brand, harvest the back catalog, sell the husk to a roll-up in 5 years. I've seen this exact playbook run on 3 firms I admired. "That's the plan," I said. I think the nephew genuinely believes he's saving it. The nephew. She let the word sit. "Iona, would you ever want it back?" I didn't answer right away. Outside my 4th floor window, the city was going dark, lights coming up in the buildings I could see, a few of which I had drawn. "I don't want my old job back," I finally said. "I want it to stop being a husk." "Those," Saoirse said, "might be the same thing." I should have understood right then what she was telling me, but I was tired, and grief makes you slow. And I had spent so long being told my judgment was nostalgia that I'd half started to believe the most senior part of me had nothing left to offer. So instead, I did the small, dignified, defeated thing. The following Monday, I went up to the top floor, to the strategy pod that used to be my room, and I told Théo I'd be leaving. He stood up from what used to be my desk. He came around it with his hand already extended, his face arranged into something he believed was warmth. Iona, honestly, I think this is the right call for everyone. I have so much respect for what you built here. The early stuff was really beautiful. He shook my hand. The early stuff. There'll always be a place for the legacy in how we talk about ourselves. In how we talk about ourselves. He was going to keep my buildings in the pitch deck and put me out the door. I shook his hand and I smiled, and I did not tell him about the call from Saoirse, or the second call, or the third, or the lunch where she'd slid a single sheet of paper across a white tablecloth and asked me to read it slowly. I just let him believe he'd won. Walked back down to the 4th floor, packed a dead key card and a folded floor plan into my bag, and left through the revolving door that turned a quarter second too slow. It would be 2 years before I came back through it. Let me stop here for a second, because I've never told this part out loud before, and I want to ask you something while it's still raw. When Théo stood up and shook my hand and called 17 years of my life the early stuff, what would you have done in that exact moment? Smiled and left, the way I did? Or said the thing you'd later wish you hadn't? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I promise the answer you give says more about you than you think. And if a story about being underestimated by someone who never earned the room is the kind of thing you want more of, go ahead and subscribe. Quietly, the way I planned everything that comes next. Because what happened 2 years later, when I walked back through that revolving door, is the part he never saw coming. The lunch with Saoirse was where it actually started, though I didn't let myself believe it for months. We met at a quiet place near the harbor, the kind with no menu prices and too few tables. She'd ordered for both of us before I arrived, which I'd later learn was simply how she removed friction from a conversation she'd already decided the outcome of. When I sat down, she didn't ask how I was holding up. She slid a single sheet of cream paper across the tablecloth and said, "Read it slowly, then tell me why it's wrong." It was a 1-page outline. At the top, Project Lantern, confidential. Caldwell Reyes's pet name for a deal, and I'd find it almost unbearably on the nose later, given the building it borrowed from. The page described, in clean institutional language, the acquisition of a controlling interest in a mid-sized architecture and design practice. Underperforming on margin. Strong but undervalued brand assets in cultural and civic work. Current management, destroying enterprise value through misaligned strategy. Recommended action. Acquire, restructure leadership, restore the design-led model that built the firm's reputation. The firm was not named on the page. It didn't need to be. I knew the brand assets it was describing. I had drawn them. "You want to buy Brenhall Stoss?" I said. "I want to buy it," Saoirse said. "And I want the person who built its reputation to run it. Not as a principal who reports to a nephew. As a partner on my side of the table who owns the outcome." She let that sit. "I don't do this often, Iona. I've turned down 4 firms this year. I'm doing this one because I think there's a rare thing here, a genuinely valuable practice being mismanaged by someone who confuses motion with judgment. Those are the cleanest deals there are." I told her it would take 18 months at least. The chairman emeritus situation, the clauses in the founder's equity, the fact that Théo would never sell into strength. "He won't have to sell into strength," she said, and smiled in a way that frightened me a little. "He'll sell into the wreckage he's about to make. We just have to be patient and ready. Are you any good at patient?" I had spent 17 years defending cantilevers through value engineering. "I'm extraordinary at patient," I said. So we waited. And while we waited, I worked. Not for Théo, never again for Théo, but for Saoirse, as an advisor to Caldwell Reyes on exactly the kind of practices it bought and rebuilt. I learned the other side of the table. I learned how deals were structured, how control was actually held, how the elegant violence of a term sheet worked. It turned out the same part of my brain that could hold an entire building in its head. Every load path, every dependency, the way one decision rippled into 40 others, was very, very good at reading a capital structure. And here is the twist Théo never understood. The thing he handed me when he called my care nostalgia. He thought my leverage was sentimental. He thought I had buildings and feelings and a fan club of young architects. He never once considered that the woman he pushed out would simply walk around to the other side of the chessboard and learn to move the pieces he didn't know existed. 2 years to the season, Project Lantern closed. I won't pretend it was elegant from the inside. It was a brutal 18 months of Théo's making and 6 of ours. Exactly as Saoirse had predicted, the firm hollowed. The civic work dried up. You can't win cultural commissions when the people who win them are gone, and the new pitch decks promise scalable design solutions. 2 more design principles left within a year, one of them poached by a rival, one of them simply done. The award nominations stopped, and the loyal clients, the ones who'd hired Brenhall Stoss for a person, not a logo, began quietly to take their next projects elsewhere. Théo responded the way his kind always does. He cut deeper. He laid off the operations layer he'd built, then half the studio. He took on commercial fit-out work at margins he bragged about and reputations he didn't notice bleeding. The revenue charts he loved went the wrong direction for 6 straight quarters, and a man who had described the founder's life's work as a craft model discovered that craft, it turns out, had been the product all along. By the time Caldwell Reyes made its move, Brenhall Stoss was not a strong firm being raided. It was a wounded one being rescued, and the only people who could argue otherwise were the people who'd wounded it. The deal was structured the way Saoirse structured everything, cleanly, with the control sitting exactly where it mattered. Caldwell Reyes acquired a controlling interest and the right to appoint new firm leadership. The fund needed an operating partner to take the chair of the rebuilt practice, someone with deep credibility in the design world, the trust of the lost clients, and the standing to bring the talent back. There was only one name on that line. I learned the precise day the papers were signed because Saoirse called me at 6:41 a.m. before I'd even made coffee. "It's done," she said. "You're the incoming chair and managing principal. We take operating control at the close meeting Thursday." A pause, and I could hear her smiling. "Théo doesn't know yet who the new leadership is. The fund's been represented through council. He's been told to expect the acquirer's appointed principal at Thursday's transition meeting." Another pause. "He has no idea it's you." I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and looked out at a skyline holding 3 buildings I'd drawn, in a firm that by Thursday I would walk back into, not as the woman he'd called nostalgia, but as the person who now owned the outcome of everything he'd done since. I didn't feel triumph exactly. I felt the still, organized clarity I'd first felt in that glass-walled room 2 years before. The only thing I said to Saoirse was, "Don't tell him. Let him find out in the room." The revolving door turned a quarter second too slow, and then I was inside, and the receptionist gave me her polite blank smile, and I rode the elevator I used to take every morning up to the top floor. The transition meeting was in the big presentation room, the one with the long glass wall over the rooftops, the one where I'd watched Théo describe the firm as a craft model 2 years before. Saoirse had arranged it deliberately. She believed, as I did, that geography is its own kind of argument. Through the glass, I could see them assembling before I reached the door. Théo at the head of the table in a fresh blazer, performing relaxed for the 2 operations lieutenants he had left. Marisol Vasquez, the managing director, looking like a woman who had not slept properly in a year. 2 lawyers for the firm, and my chest did something complicated. Wren Aldridge, still here, still holding the design side together with her fingernails, seated near the back where the power lists sit. Saoirse went in first, crisp, unreadable, with the Caldwell-Reyes counsel beside her. Théo stood and did his hand-already extended routine for her, the warmth he kept in a drawer. Saoirse Holloway, genuine pleasure. We're so aligned on the upside here. Our incoming chair and managing principal is just behind me, Saoirse said. She'll be taking operating control of the firm at the close of this meeting. I think you 2 may know each other. And I walked in. I have tried many times to describe Théo's face in that second, and I keep landing on the same image. A building at the exact instant a load-bearing wall is removed before gravity has done its arithmetic. Everything still standing, nothing yet fallen. Pure structural disbelief. He stood up. I think it was reflex, the body's old script for greeting an arriving principal. He stood up, and his hand started automatically to extend toward me, the warm drawer handshake, and then his brain caught up to his arm, and the hand stopped halfway across the table, hanging in the air between us like a thing he no longer knew what to do with. Iona, he said. Just my name. The rehearsed vocabulary had abandoned him completely. Théo. I let his hand hang for 1 full second before I took it, shook it once, and let it go. Thank you for keeping my chair warm. I sat at the head of the table. He had to find another seat. What followed was not a speech. I want to be clear about that, because the version Théo will tell involves an ambush and a tirade, and there was neither. There was just the slow, methodical reading out of consequences, the way you'd walk a client through why their building was going to cost what it cost. Saoirse's counsel laid the documents on the table. Caldwell-Reyes held controlling interest. The fund had exercised its right to appoint firm leadership. As of the close of this meeting, Théo Castellani's role of head of strategic direction, a title I noted that did not appear in any founding document, was eliminated. His position on the operating committee dissolved. His authority over studio direction, pitch strategy, and personnel transferred to the office of the chair, to me. You can't, Théo started. Aldous sold his remaining interest to the fund 8 weeks ago, Saoirse said, not unkindly. He was very clear about why. Would you like to hear the why, or shall we move on? He didn't want to hear the why. The why was sitting at the head of the table. Then came the part I had not planned, the part that surprised even me. Théo, cornered, did what cornered men do. He reached for the only weapon he'd ever trusted, the numbers. This firm has real problems, he said, his voice climbing, talking past me now to the lawyers, to Marisol, to the room. Margins are a disaster. The civic work was bleeding us dry. I made hard calls. You can't run a business on someone's feelings. He gestured at me without looking at me, on her version of this place. I was protecting enterprise value. I was the only adult. You destroyed it. I said it quietly, and the room went still in that clean, clear way I knew so well. You inherited a firm whose reputation took 30 years and 4 people's lives to build, and you ran it into the ground in 24 months because you could not tell the difference between what costs money and what makes it. The civic work wasn't bleeding you. The civic work was the reason the commercial work ever called. You sold the thing that brought the clients, and then you were confused when the clients stopped calling. I slid one sheet of paper toward him. Not a term sheet. A single page Saoirse and I had prepared together, almost as a courtesy. 2 years ago you told me the market doesn't pay for legacy, I said. Here's what the market actually said. On the page, the firm's enterprise value the quarter I left, and its value at the close of this deal. The number had collapsed by more than half. That's not nostalgia, Théo. That's the price of your judgment in the only language you respect. You didn't lose me a few projects. You vaporized the better part of what 3 founders spent their lives building, and the fund bought it back for a fraction of what it was worth, which is the only reason you and I are sitting in the same room. He looked at the number. His mouth opened and produced nothing. Marisol, who had stayed neutral for 2 years, who had let "we can't run a business on someone's feelings" go unanswered in a room full of people, finally spoke, and she spoke to me. Iona, the clients. Will they? 3 of them called me this week, I said. When the rumor got out, they want to know if the firm is itself again before they bring back the work they pulled. I let that land on Théo specifically. They were never the firm's clients. They were mine. You just never asked whose relationships you were spending. Ren, in the powerless seats at the back, had started very quietly to cry. The good kind, the relief kind. I caught her eye and gave her the look I'd given her 2 years before, the one that used to mean be careful. This time it meant we're done being careful. Théo gathered the last of himself. So what? I'm just out. After everything You're out as of the close of this meeting, I said. Counsel will walk you through your terms. They're more generous than what you gave me, which was nothing. I stood, because the chair stands when the meeting is over. You called my work the early stuff. You kept my buildings in your pitch deck and put me out the door. So here's the part I want you to actually hear, Théo, because you've never heard it from anyone. He looked up. The buildings were never the legacy, I said. I was. The close meeting ended at 11:34 a.m. By 11:50, Théo Castellani had been escorted to gather his things from what had been my room, then his room, and was now nobody's room. I didn't watch. I'd learned 2 years earlier that there is no dignity to be harvested from watching someone carry a box. I went instead to the long glass wall and looked out at the rooftops toward the harbor and let myself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the size of what had just happened. Then I went back to work, because that is the only thing I have ever actually wanted to do. The first week, I did almost nothing visible. People expect a new chair to arrive with a slide deck and a vision statement and a reorganization, Theo's whole religion. I did the opposite. I walked the studio floor and learned every name. I sat with the project teams Théo had starved and asked them what they were proud of, then listened to the answers, which in some cases took a while because no one had asked them in 2 years. I reopened the principal's review, the one I'd run for 9 years, and I ran it again, and I invited Ren Aldridge to co-chair it. And then, 4 weeks later, I made her a partner, the first design principal promoted on merit at the firm in longer than anyone could remember. The operations layer Théo had built and half dismantled, I dissolved entirely. The studio operations pod, the project scoring framework that punished careful work, the consultants who had opinions about buildings and could not draw, gone. I kept 3 people from that whole apparatus, the 3 who'd quietly hated it from the inside dot. The clients came back the way clients do, not in a flood, but in a returning tide. Saoirse had been right about the cleanest deals being the mismanaged but valuable ones. She had not mentioned that the cleanup is its own slow reward. The first commission I won as chair was a civic one. A public library for a coastal town that had seen the lantern and wanted something that makes the kids want to stay inside. I gave the lead to a young architect Théo had once scored as low margin. She is going to be better than I ever was. Aldous Brenhall came to the studio once, near the end of that first year, moving slowly with a cane and a much slower voice. He stood in front of the cast bronze wall in the lobby, the one with the project names etched into it, and he looked at it for a long time. Then he asked me, very quietly, whether I'd put my name back on the 4 that were mine. I told him I hadn't, and I wasn't going to. "Why not?" he asked. "You earned them." "Because the names on a wall were never the point," I said. "You taught me that the night you kept me until 2 a.m. over a stairwell. The building was the point. The people who feel something inside it are the point." I took his arm. "I don't need my name on the wall, Aldous. I own the firm that owns the wall. That's a better kind of permanent." He laughed, a dry, delighted founder's laugh, and patted my hand, and that was the last good conversation we had before he passed that winter. I gave the eulogy. I did not mention his nephew once, which was, I think, its own complete sentence. A's for Théo. I heard, the way you hear these things, that he landed at a growth advisory firm that helps creative practices scale beyond the founder. I heard he tells the story of Brenhall Stoss as a turnaround he was brought in to attempt, and a market that wasn't ready. I heard he still has the old pitch deck, the one with my buildings in it, the early stuff, the legacy, the things the market supposedly doesn't pay for. He can keep the deck. I have the firm. 2 years and 1 season after a man called my life's work nostalgia and shook my hand on the way out the door, I sit in the chair at the head of the long glass room, and the revolving door downstairs still turns a quarter second too slow. It clipped a junior architect's heel her first morning last week. She told me about it, embarrassed, in the elevator. I told her not to fix it. Some things you keep exactly as they are, so you never forget the pause before the glass lets you through.